Hello, hello, hello. Yeah, today found out how to modify some of the Catherine Classic levels. So I figured do a little video on messing with that. I haven't done an extensive research really, but this was just my initial findings, and I thought it was cool, so I wanted to share with everybody else. So the general process that I used was first by downloading Process Manager, which is a utility provided by Windows to get some more view on what things are doing. So, for instance, you can look up Procmon, you'll see that's from Microsoft. Um, I'll reset all this because it has my settings on there. Um, but when you first load it up, you'll have to do some reading on the manual to kind of begin to navigate this stuff. But the general idea here is that we are going to attach this process monitor to the Catherine process, and then we'll be able to get some more insight on what it is viewing and what it is using. So maybe right off the bat, what I'll do is you just click on the filter, and then you can specify the different things. Again, this would be where you would need to read the man pages for how this works exactly. But if you're not quite sure, a decent thing to start is just to use description and contains. And in our case here, we just want to see what Catherine will use. And then when you apply this, you'll notice I'm not running Catherine, so there should be nothing that pops up. But as soon as I load the game, you can start to see that, whoa, this Catherine.exe has suddenly looked at and opened a bunch of stuff, a bunch of DLLs, and then it is organized. You can see that the time scale is going up. So higher up on this scale means it was earlier. So to see the most recent things, we'll have to go all the way down to the bottom. You can see that there's some things here like data title, some attaching the fonts, and so on and so forth. But, that's great and all, but we wanted to get to the point where we understand how the levels are loaded. And in Catherine kind of had a theory. This would be if you're trying a different game, you would have your own theories and test them however you want. But my theory in Catherine was that, oh, I think that when I pick a level, it tries to read from a file and load it. So in order to actually test that, this is the general process that I used was I said, okay, you know what? Let me look at the path of something and let me see if it contains um, or actually, the first thing I wanted to see was I wanted to see an operation, and the operation is you can see there are a number of different ones, but I just want to see all the read file. And if I add that rule and I apply it, you'll see that suddenly this cuts down on a whole lot of things. And I start to see that, oh, there's data sound voice CPK. Whoa, that was a crazy. Let me turn down the Catherine audio real quick. I'll even turn it down to nothing. Um, Yeah, so if I did that, all right, I could see that all these things load. Now the next thing is I probably want to go all the way down to the bottom. And when I click Coliseum, you'll see that the number of processes starts to increase a lot. In the bottom left of this panel, you can see that there are 152,000 events that it has loaded up. And you can see on the right side that the list keeps growing. Right, it's playing this movie right now. So I would know that, hey, if I go to this path, that should be playing this cutscene in the game. Um, so, Process Monitor is very useful in that sense. So going forward, say I just load up one of the levels, Underground Cemetery. Now if I return back to here, I should see that it's doing a bunch of stuff. Um, and so I can see that it's loading some objects, puzzle effects. I don't remember if I actually messed with this level or not, so I don't know if it will be the real underground cemetery before uploading this or before recording this. Yeah, it's a different underground cemetery, but that's fine. Uh, that works. Um, Bigger thing is that you can see that, hey, started to notice some of these data puzzle maps. That seems pretty important, and that's really the last thing that gets loaded before this. You can see sound BGM, right, background music. That's not really what we're looking for. Something that looks promising is this puzzle script and puzzle map. Um, and this would just be where if you're trying to do your own game, you would, experiment. Um, but the puzzle map is actually what we want. And so I can see, oh, hey, this loads to something. If you double click on the event, it gives you, a bunch of properties about it. So in my case here, I just wanted to copy it and close this. And then maybe I wanted to add now, just to get rid of the excess stuff that's going on, I would do path. And path is everything that gets loaded in slash map. And if I add this and I apply it, it should, maybe I need to do it that way. Yeah. It loads puzzle map. I was hoping that it would actually display the full what file got loaded. Oh, puzzle. Ah, you see, that's where you gotta be careful. One's is and one's contains. So this, I should remove this, and I should make this contains. And if I add this rule and then apply it, I can see that these got loaded a couple times. So close the filters. So that's cool. But what this means is that then if we go into our file explorer and go to uh, that path, so this one is to the map section, you'll see that there are a number of files in here. And these all correspond to the different levels of the game. And the different prefixes mean different things. For example, the P001s correspond to the story mode underground cemeteries, all the way up to 9 corresponds to the story levels. And then they have some test levels and some leftover things that have just been left in the game. For example, P011, these are the Babel maps. P011 through 11, 12, 13, and 14 are actually the co-op versions of the maps that get loaded. Meanwhile, the base ones are the single-player versions. And you can see that there are actually 2 maps that are playable that were just not included in the game, whether they weren't finished or whatever. The developers weren't happy with it. They're just not there. So you can see that there are, for the 13, these are the multiplayer levels that get loaded, 0 through 9, and there's also a 10th hidden map. But to get to the actual underground cemetery, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, and again, I've mentioned this before, but whenever you're messing with files, you should really try to make backups of this stuff. On Steam, you can reinstall the game data, so it's not a really big deal, but just as a general rule of thumb, you probably want to make backups. That way you can quickly return to a thing. So, you notice that when you load a level, it tries to read the file. So, once the level's loaded, any changes that you make, you'll have to go back out to stage select and then back in for those to take effect. Now, you should see that now that I have reloaded the game, after a little bit of time here, you should see a new read file operation take place, and that it tries to read that. And this is the original Underground Cemetery that comes with the game. Which is great. It's fully playable and you can move around and do fun stuff. Now, so that was just an overview of the process on finding out, hey, where are the map files and how is the game using them? And, not all games are going to work where, okay, I can just easily swap and replace certain files and it just works. Catherine thankfully did. But the next part that is more relevant is actually modifying these files. So in this case, what a decent starting point would be opening in some kind of hex editor. Um, so I use HXD, which is fine. Works pretty good. And this would be where if you're using a different game, it would require a lot of really just hard work to read and figure out, okay, what do each of these things mean? Now, I have a decent bit of experience with Catherine, so, I'm able to look at stuff and kind of figure it out pretty quickly. For instance, I know from prior experiments with Catherine that every block actually corresponds to an integer number data type. For instance, the normal white blocks are just block type 1, and crack blocks are block type 2, and so on and so forth. So when I open up this file, I see a number of things. At first, you're going to get, the identifier of the file, the magic. But a little bit lower, I can see that there's a 0, 1, a number of spaces, and a 0, 1. And again, this repeats a 0, 1, and a 0, 1, and so forth. And then I start to see that there's 1, 1, some zeros, 1, 0, 0, 1. And I go, in my head, I know that that kind of looks like what some of the blocks are in game, some of the patterns in the row. So my first instinct was, in this case, just to mess with the numbers. Again, you can feel fairly safe in doing this because at least with Steam games and stuff, you could just reinstall them. It's not a big deal. So simple test was to change an O1 to an O2, save it, and reload Underground Cemetery and see what happens. Takes a little bit of time for the loading screens, of course, but after this gets done, you should see these changes take effect. And sure enough, you can kind of notice that in the bottom right of the screen now that this block has now turned into a cracked block, corresponding to block type 2. We can also pick up a couple more things just based off of seeing this. For instance, we're reading this from left to right, probably, unless you're Japanese or something. But you're probably going to look at this from left to right. And so you might think that, oh, the left number corresponds to the left side of the stage and the right number corresponds to the right. But you can actually notice that, hey, this 0, 2 was left of this 0, 1, but it actually it modified the block on the right side. And that just has to do with the endianness of how this stuff is read. You can look up that if you want. But each one of these corresponds to a byte, and so they're just read in reverse, if you just want to think of it that way. So any change that you make will apply in reverse in the row. But so when you look at this, you can also start to think about, okay, well, if the game is reading in rows as whole sections of code, it is probably also reading in depth in a certain way. So a quick way to test that out for me, I would just start setting all these to ones and just seeing how many of these it takes until it leads to a change in a different depth. So for instance, this was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? So I just picked a selection of 8. That's just as a numbers like computer thing. Usually you're going to get like 8 bytes or segments of 8 and 2 and such. That's typically how things are read. And also knowing in Catherine that rows are not infinite space, that they're usually no more than like 16 across. So probably segments of 16 are going to be whole rows. So you can see there that did a bunch of things, and it had completed this row, and that this guy is out there. Now, I'm not sure if he's actually in line or if he's above or what and why he didn't fall, but let's see. He is in that row. It just happened to turn out a little bit strangely. But this probably means that if I do another 1, 1 here, save and reload the map, this is where, I mean, this is a lot of trial and error and just kind of just doing it. It's kind of tedious to load things this way, and maybe I'll get around to making some kind of graphical tool to make the level easier to edit. And I'm also not sure entirely about how to modify the drop patterns. But you can see there that one of the blocks had depth to it. So that means probably, if I make another 1, 1, that it would continue the pattern of that depth. So many of these are going to be rows and columns, and it just reads it that way. So that's the first start on modifying some Catherine levels. Um, and if you are in the Catherine Discord, I've posted a couple modifications to some levels that were like not very competitive, and I'll probably post a video later at some point of um, playing some of the levels that were not finished. Um, but yeah, I figured that would be a nice thing to share. So hopefully someone finds some use out of this. Um, yeah, thanks.